Have you ever tried to forget someone but their voice still echoes inside your mind? Sometimes it's not the person we miss, but the version of ourselves we were when they spoke to us. In this story, I'll take you to a quiet morning in Denmark where I finally learned that some voices never leave us. They stay whispering lessons, courage, and memories, until one day they become our own voice. Under the Danish sky. It was one of those Danish mornings when the sky looked half awake, gray, quiet, and honest. The streets were still wet from last night's rain, and the air smelled like cold bread and sea salt. I was walking to the bus stop, half thinking in Danish, half dreaming in English. And then out of nowhere I heard it, a voice. Not from outside but inside my head. Familiar one. Soft. Patient. Like someone I hadn't talked to in years, whispering, "Keep going." For a second I froze. You know that strange feeling when you hear a memory louder than the world around you? That was it. I remembered the first time I came to Denmark. Lost, quiet, trying to find my words in another language. People spoke fast, their sounds sharp and slippery. My English was slow, broken, full of pauses. I felt like a silent movie in a world full of sound. But that voice, the one that stayed in my head, was different. It didn't judge. It reminded me to breathe before I spoke, to listen before I answered. I used to hate my accent. It felt heavy, foreign. Yet that morning under the Danish sky, it didn't sound bad at all. It sounded real. I think every learner reaches this point. When your biggest battle isn't grammar or vocabulary, but the echo of self-doubt. You start hearing it in every word. I'm not good enough. They'll laugh. I'll never sound native. But here's the secret I wish someone had told me earlier. The moment you stop fighting your own voice is the moment you truly begin to learn. So I stood there, watching the fog roll over the rooftops of Copenhagen, and whispered out loud, "I'm still here." Maybe the voice wasn't from someone else after all. Maybe it was me, the version of myself that refused to give up. If you're listening to this, maybe you have that voice too. The one that tells you to keep trying even when no one is watching. Hold on to it. It might be the quietest sound in your life, but it's also the truest. When silence spoke louder. Denmark can be a strangely quiet place. The streets hum softly, cafes whisper, and even the wind seems to move politely between buildings. First, that silence scared me. It felt like standing in a room where no one remembered your name. I missed noise, the laughter of my friends back home, the chaos of my old life, even the sound of my native language bouncing around like music I didn't know I loved until it was gone. But then something changed. Silence started to speak. Not with words but with space for me to listen. I began to hear the rhythm of my own thoughts, the patterns of my English sentences forming slowly in my head. When no one around me was talking, I finally had time to hear myself. And in that quiet I realized how messy my thoughts were. Like tangled threads of two languages fighting for control. One night, I sat by the window of my small apartment in Aarhus, staring at the snowflakes melting on the glass. I whispered to myself, "This is your classroom now." I began to read English aloud, slowly, clearly, letting each word land on my tongue like something precious. First it felt silly. Talking to myself? Out loud? But that's when learning stopped being about books and started being about presence. Science says when you speak words aloud, Your brain processes them through 3 channels at once: sound, motion, and meaning. You hear them, you feel them, you own them. That's why the best language teacher you'll ever have might just be your own voice. So, in that Danish silence, I practiced every day. Ordering coffee, asking for directions, talking to my reflection. My accent didn't disappear, but something better happened. I stopped apologizing for it. The silence I once feared had become my training ground. Now I tell my students this: don't run from silence. It's not empty. It's full of opportunity. When you speak into the quiet, you can finally hear the person you're becoming. Under the Danish sky, I found that silence doesn't make you invisible. It teaches you how to listen deeply enough to find your own sound. The echo of a lesson. There's something funny about memories. They don't always come back as pictures. Sometimes they return as voices. Mine often arrived as the echo of my old English teacher saying, "Don't chase perfection, chase connection." Back then I didn't understand what she meant. I was obsessed with speaking perfectly, hitting every tense, every sound, every idiom. I treated English like math, but it's not math, is it? It's music. It's rhythm. It's emotion wrapped in sound. When I moved to Denmark, that echo followed me. Every time I tried to speak, her words came back. Chase connection. I remember one afternoon at a cafe in Copenhagen, the kind with candlelight even at noon, a barista asked me, "How's your day?" I froze for half a second, afraid my sentence wouldn't sound right. Then I just smiled and said, "It's getting better, now that you asked." He laughed. And just like that, I realized communication is not about being flawless, it's about being human. That small conversation stayed with me longer than any grammar lesson. It was proof that English wasn't something I had to perform. It was something I could live. Every mistake I made was a bridge, not a wall. That's what people often forget. The goal of language isn't to sound like a native. It's to sound like yourself when you're brave. If you've ever felt afraid to speak because your words might come out wrong, remember this. Even native speakers stumble, mumble, and mix up words all the time. The difference is they keep talking. That's the secret. Keep the echo alive. There's also science behind it. Studies in language acquisition show that speaking imperfectly, but consistently strengthens the neural pathways that connect sound and memory. In simple terms, your brain doesn't care if it's perfect. It just wants practice. So every morning after that, I made a habit. I'd whisper small sentences while walking to the metro. "It's cold today. I'm tired. But I'm learning." It sounded simple, but that's how the echo became a rhythm, the sound of persistence. And now, years later, whenever I speak English, even here under the gray Danish sky, I still hear that voice saying softly, "Don't chase perfection. Chase connection." Conversations with my fear. Fear has a voice. It doesn't shout, it whispers. Mine used to say things like, "Don't speak yet," or "You'll sound stupid," or my favorite, "They'll notice your accent." It was always polite, almost reasonable, like it was trying to protect me. But fear is tricky. It dresses like safety while quietly stealing every chance you have to grow. One rainy afternoon in Odense, I decided to talk back. Literally. I sat by my desk, opened my notebook, and wrote down every fear I had about speaking English. Then for each one I spoke an answer out loud in English. Yes, I have an accent, but it's the sound of where I've been. Yes, I make mistakes, but mistakes mean movement. No, I'm not fluent yet, but I'm not silent either. First it felt like therapy, then it felt like rebellion, and slowly it became transformation. Because every time I gave my fear a voice, I took back its power. You see, fear feeds on silence. The more you avoid speaking, the louder it grows in your head. But when you speak, even imperfectly, you change the chemistry of your brain. Neuroscientists call it exposure rewiring. Each time you face a fear, your amygdala, the fear center of your brain, learns that you're safe. You literally teach your mind courage by using your voice. So I turned that exercise into a ritual. Every morning before work, I'd stand in front of the mirror and ask myself one question in English. What are you afraid of today? Then I'd answer slowly, honestly, sometimes trembling, until my voice felt steady again. Funny thing is, the more I talked to my fear, the more it started sounding like a teacher. It wasn't trying to stop me anymore. It was showing me what mattered. The words I hesitated on were the ones I needed most. The sentences I avoided held the truths I wasn't ready to face. That's when I realized learning English wasn't just about communication. It was about confronting the parts of myself I'd been avoiding. Every word I spoke was proof that I was still trying, still alive, still here. So, if you ever feel afraid to open your mouth, remember this: your fear isn't your enemy. It's your invitation. Speak back to it, out loud, because courage doesn't start in silence. It starts with sound. Finding my own voice. One morning in Aarhus, the city was wrapped in fog, and I could barely see the bicycles gliding past me. Everything felt quiet, almost dreamlike. I was walking to my English conversation group, a small circle of strangers who met once a week to practice speaking. Most of us weren't confident. We stumbled, hesitated, and laughed nervously after every sentence. But that day, something shifted. The teacher, a woman with warm eyes and a messy bun, said, "Today, no correction. Just talk." First it felt wrong. No rules, no red marks, just talking. But then it happened. The moment my voice stopped performing and started being. I told a story about my first winter in Denmark. How the snow surprised me. How the silence of the streets made me both lonely and calm. My grammar wasn't perfect. I mixed tenses. I forgot words. Yet people listened. They smiled. One person even said, "That's beautiful." And for the first time I believed them. That's when I understood. Language learning isn't about replacing your voice with someone else's. It's about expanding it, letting it hold more sounds, more feelings, more worlds. My accent wasn't something to hide. It was a souvenir of survival, proof that I'd crossed borders not just on maps but inside myself. The more I spoke, the more that inner voice, the one that used to whisper doubts, began to soften. It stopped asking, "Will they understand me?" and started asking, "Do I understand myself?" That's when learning became liberation. There's real science behind this transformation. Studies on bilingualism show that when you switch between languages, you also shift perspectives. You see the world from more than one angle. That's what English gave me, not just vocabulary but a second way to think, to feel, to see. Now, whenever I speak English, I hear a mix of all the people who've shaped me, my teachers, my friends, even the strangers whose words stuck in my mind. But layered underneath all of them is something new, my voice. Not perfect, not native, but unmistakably mine. And maybe that's what fluency really is. Not the absence of mistakes, but the presence of authenticity. The sound of you, unafraid. If you're on this journey too, remember, your voice isn't lost. It's just waiting for you to trust it enough to speak. The turning point, speaking without fear. There was one evening that changed everything. I was at a small cafe near the harbor, the kind with fogged-up windows and the smell of cinnamon and coffee in the air. My friends were all Danish, chatting effortlessly, switching between Danish and English like it was one language. I laughed when they laughed, nodded when they nodded, but inside I felt miles away. Then one of them turned to me and said, "You're so quiet tonight. Are you okay?" And before I could stop myself, I said in English, shaky, slow but real, "I'm tired of being afraid to speak." They all went silent. Not out of judgment, but respect. One of them smiled and said, "Then start here. We'll listen." Something broke open in me that night. I started talking. Not perfectly, not fluently, but honestly. I told them about how learning English felt like learning how to exist again, how I was scared people would judge my accent, my mistakes, my pauses. But the more I spoke, the lighter I felt. My words weren't flawless, but they were true. That night I realized people don't connect to perfect English. They connect to emotion, to honesty, to the courage behind your words. Every learner carries a silent fear, the fear of sounding wrong, of not belonging. But every time you speak, you prove that fear wrong. You show up. You try. You connect. And that's how language stops being a school subject and becomes something alive, something that lives in you. Since then, I've stopped aiming for perfect sentences. I aim for real moments. The way a stranger's smile widens when I say, "Have a nice day." The warmth of a conversation that flows, even if the grammar doesn't. So here's what I've learned. Fluency isn't when you stop making mistakes, it's when mistakes stop making you stop. And maybe, just maybe, the most beautiful English you'll ever speak will be the one that carries your truth, your accent, your courage, all at once. Because at the end of the day, language isn't just about speaking correctly, it's about being understood, and finally understanding yourself. The final note, what English really taught me. Months passed. Seasons changed. The Danish winter melted into soft light and quiet rain. One morning, as I walked by the harbor, I caught my reflection in the cafe window. The same person, yet not the same at all. That I wasn't fluent like a native speaker. But I was free, that I could finally say what I meant. Even if the words came slowly, I could tell stories, share pain, comfort someone, ask for help, laugh at jokes that once confused me. My English wasn't perfect, but it was alive. That's when it hit me. I hadn't just learned a language, that I had learned to trust myself again, because every word I spoke, every sentence I built, was a small act of bravery. English became my mirror, showing me how far I'd come, how much I'd grown. When I think back to that version of me, sitting alone under Danish stars pretending everything was fine, I wish I could whisper to him, "You don't have to be perfect to be understood. You just have to begin." Maybe that's what this whole journey is about. Not chasing flawless speech, but building a bridge between hearts. Because when you speak, even with mistakes, someone out there hears you and feels less alone. And in that connection, that fragile, beautiful moment of understanding, language fulfills its purpose. So if you're still learning, still doubting, still afraid to speak, let this be your sign. Speak anyway. Speak softly, slowly, honestly, because your story deserves to be heard in any language. The voice that stayed, closing and call to action. That's all for today. The voice that once lived in my head has become a rhythm, a part of my life, and the confidence to step out into the world, even though my English isn't perfect. Every word I speak is a step forward, a story, a piece of myself I've rediscovered. If you're learning English, feeling discouraged, or afraid of making mistakes, remember, no one is perfect. Start by practicing listening, reading, and speaking every day. Speak slowly, clearly, and honestly. Those small steps will lead you to confidence and a living, breathing English that becomes part of your life. Share this story if you can relate, and comment one English word or sentence you learned today. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more slow, easy to understand English listening, reading, and speaking videos, where every story is an inspiring learning journey. That's all for today. I'll make more videos like this in the future, so don't forget to subscribe and watch.